Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to the first webinar of 2023. This is Rebecca Bailey, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. We have two speakers this morning, Doctors Vincent Lemaire and Fei Hui. I'm gonna apologize because I'm mispronouncing your last name, but I will try. Vincent and Fei are part of the Immuno oncology QSP working group under the QSP Special Interest Group of the International Society of Pharmacometrics. Today, they're going to be talking about a very important topic, the perceptions of the use and impact of QSP in immuno oncology. While we would all love to believe that our work is highly impactful, truly understanding how it's perceived and what impact our work has is really critical. As a community, we have the opportunity to expand the use of QSP modeling, but for that to happen, it must have a positive impact on drug development, and it must be perceived to have a positive impact. So today, our speakers are going to talk about some work that they have done on understanding both the impact that QSP does have and the perception of it. The speakers will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. You can send your questions to the speakers at any time during the webinar just by entering the questions into the questions pane on your GoToWebinar side panel. Again, our speakers today are Vincent Lemaire. Vincent is currently a distinguished scientist in clinical pharmacology at Genentech. He has more than 15 years of experience in developing mechanistic, statistical, and computational models to help in drug development in preclinical and clinical settings, with lately a strong focus on clinical development. He's done that for indications in oncology, immuno-oncology, and metabolic diseases. And his current research interests are in finding ways to improve the rate of success of cancer immunotherapy indications. Fei is Vice President, Head of Modeling and Simulation Services at Applied BioMath. In this role, she oversees all client projects ranging from early discovery to clinical development to ensure timely delivery of high-quality modeling and simulation results to address critical questions. With over 20 years of experience in modeling and simulation, supporting programs in many different disease areas, including oncology, CV Med, immunology, neuroscience, and rare diseases at different stages of drug R&D, Fei has firsthand witnessed how integration of data and biological understanding through modeling and simulation has helped to address critical questions and reduce the time and cost of drug development programs. So with that, I would like to welcome our speakers, Fei and Vincent, and we are now going to start our broadcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, for the nice introduction and the invitation. Hello, everyone. My name is Fei Hua. I'm from Applied BioMath. It's my great pleasure today to get to present the results of a recent survey on the use and the impact of QSP modeling in cancer immunotherapy, together with Vincent from Genentech. This work has been published a couple months ago in the Journal of Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics as a white paper. If you're interested in knowing more details about the work, please feel free to go check it out. First of all, I'd like to thank all the co-authors and the IO QSP working group for their contribution. The survey was conducted on behalf of the IO QSP working group, which is a special interest group under International Society of Pharmacometrics. One major mission of the working group is to maximize the impact of QSP modeling in IO drug discovery, development, and use in patients. The survey was one of the activities that we conducted to support this mission. The idea of deploying immune system to treat cancer has been tested a long time ago, as early as 19th century. As shown here is a news report from New York Times back in 1908, reporting the successful treatment of cancer patients using heat-inactivated bacteria by an American surgeon called William Coley. This treatment was being referred to as Coley's toxins, and it has successfully treated over 1,000 patients back then. With the recent advancement in the understanding of cancer biology and immune system, scientists has realized that for tumor to form, they need to develop the capability of escape immune surveillance. The importance of this feature was recognized when it was added as an emerging hallmark of cancer on top of the original 6 hallmarks when Weinberger published their second edition of Hallmarks of Cancer in 2011. The figure on the right here shows all the new hallmarks added in this new edition. The real boom of the immuno-oncology drug development was triggered by the development and approval of the checkpoint inhibitor in early 2000. Since then, not only the number of clinical trials on the checkpoint inhibitor has grown dramatically, as shown in the graph on the left here. There are also many new and innovative approaches being used as IO agents. The figure on the right summarizes the classification of immuno-oncology agents, which is from a recent review paper from Immunotherapy of Cancer journal. Some examples, in addition to the checkpoint inhibitor, include immunocytokines, bispecific antibodies cross-linking T cells and tumor cells, anti-cancer vaccines, oncolytic virus, adoptive cell therapy, engineered adoptive cell therapy such as CAR-Ts, CAR-NKs. Overall, cancer immunotherapy has now revolutionized the field of oncology by providing promising treatments with less side effects than traditional chemotherapy and much more prolonged survival for some traditionally incurable cancers. Now let's switch gear and talk a little bit about different modeling approaches commonly used in drug R&D. Specifically, I will focus on the models based on ordinary differential equations. The first type is empirical PK and PD model. This approach is focused on finding a minimal set of equations to best describe observed PK and PD data. So the focus is really on capturing the data. The second approach is called mechanistic PK and PD model. So in this modeling approach, it integrates the primary pharmacology of the drug, such as binding to the targets, and use that to link PK and PD. From there, we can add a lot more biology into the model, whether it's to describe the disease or to describe the downstream effect after drug engagement into its primary target. So this third approach is called Quantitative Systems Pharmacology Modeling Approach, or QSP. From left to right, the knowledge captured in the model increases. Therefore, the complexity of the model also increases. Sometimes, the identifiability of the model drops. However, different approaches do have different advantages. For example, empirical PK/PD model is a lot smaller in scale, therefore it's a lot faster to run the simulations. It is very useful to make predictions when we require interpolating within the existing data range. As the knowledge captured in the model increases, it in general becomes better at performing extrapolation kind of predictions, such as when you need to predict a PK/PD changes in a new patient population where the drug has never been tested before, or to predict effect of a new drug for a new mechanism where the drug doesn't even exist yet. So in this survey, we focus specifically on the QSP model. What are the key components need to be included in a QSP model to support IO programs? It need to include both immune cells and tumor cells, and often the immunosynapse, which is the interface when the two cell types interact with each other. It often includes extracellular signal, i.e. cytokines, and intracellular signaling pathways. At organ level, in addition to tumor and blood, tumor-draining lymph node and lymphatic systems are often included. Immune cells and signal molecules can move in and out of the tumor and to other tissues carried by either blood or lymphatic system. Certainly, the mechanism of action of the therapy should also be captured. Due to the heterogeneity in tumor microenvironment and the variability among patients, virtual patients are often created to understand the variability in treatment response. The virtual patients are represented by the many people figures in this diagram. So the IO QSP model is often a multiple scale model, including reactions at the molecular level all the way to organ and population levels. The survey was conducted using Google Form in 2021. The goal of the survey was to evaluate the current impact of QSP in cancer immunotherapy, to identify areas of advantages of using QSP model as well as challenges of this approach, to get a sense of where the field should go in the future. We want to get these perspectives not only from people who are modelers in the QSP field, but also people who don't have experience in developing models themselves. Therefore, when we send out the survey to all the ISoP members, we also encourage them to forward this survey to their colleagues who are involved in the IO programs. There are a total of 16 questions in the survey that fall in 5 categories. The first one is to capture the background of people filling in the survey. The next 3 is to address each of the goals. And then there is one final open questions to capture any additional thoughts. This survey was open for 4 months. At the end, we collected a total of 134 responses. This slide summarizes the demographics of all the respondents. Among them, 2/3 are from pharmaceutical or biotech companies. A little less than a quarter are from consulting services, and the rest are from academic institutions. We also collected information about the size of the organization they're working at. Roughly half are from large companies with greater than 10,000 employees. The rest are distributed from the companies of various size. It's good to see there is a significant number of people are working at small companies with less than 100 employees. These probably are representing people working either at consulting companies or really small biotech companies. When looking at the roles the respondents play in their company, many are QSP modelers. However, it's also really good to see there is a wide range of other roles the survey respondents have, such as clinicians, translational scientists, DMPK scientists, statistician, as well as project lead and portfolio managers. To help analyze the results, we further group these people into 3 categories based on the roles they have in the company as well as their modeling experience. These 3 categories are QSP modelers, non-QSP modelers, and then non-modelers. The non-QSP modelers will be those who are probably involved in developing empirical PK/PD models or population PK/PD model analysis. The non-modelers will be those who have never involved in developing model directly themselves. at this point, I'm going to pass on to Vincent, who will present the survey results.
Well, thank you, Faye, for setting up the scientific context and for introducing the survey and how it came to be. And thank you, Rebecca, for the invitation and for the introduction early on. So my name is Vincent Lemaire, and I am a scientist at Genentech, and now I'm going to present some of the key results from the survey and some interpretation that we came up with. And I am starting with survey questions related to the areas of application of QSP in immuno-oncology. So one of the questions that was asked in the survey was, what are the key IO questions that QSP has already facilitated in your programs? And the respondents were given a number of application areas, and which are now sorted by number of responses here in this bar chart. And each bar here represents the proportion of respondents that selected a particular application of QSP. And the colored arrows that you can see here on top of each bar represent the deviation from the average in the respondents per modular types. So for example, here about 54% of all respondents have indicated that QSP was used for combination therapies in some of their programs, but about 68% of QSP modelers have done so, and about 37% of non-modelers have done so. And the two areas of application of QSP with the most responses were dosing and scheduling and combination therapies. And we actually found that there was a good correlation between the level of responses in our survey and the proportion of articles in these domains of application in the literature, with a relatively high number of papers in dosing and scheduling, combination therapy, and for clinical trial design. And so that may explain the high level of responses that we observe in these areas. So the top area is dosing and scheduling, which is not necessarily a surprise because it is a typical domain of application of modeling in drug development, not just for QSP or IO. And an example of paper in this area is the paper by Oseni et al., where they use QSP to determine optimal dosing to minimize toxicity from T-cell engagers. And the second highest area of application from the survey is combination therapy. And an example of paper here is the paper of Kozinski et al., where they use QSP to study the combination of anti-PD-1 and radiotherapy. And we also found that there is very little papers in the literature in the lowest areas from the survey responses, which are shown here. So for example, for target validation or candidate selection, maybe it makes sense that there is less usage of QSP in these early drug development areas because there is less data available at this stage to calibrate the models. Reverse translation is a relatively new area in itself, so that may explain why it seems to be less of an application of QSP yet. It is also an area that is currently dominated by biomarker scientists and biologists, with whom there is still a significant communication gap with QSP modelers. However, reverse translation, we think should be the perfect area of application for QSP because there should be clinical data available at this stage. And the goal of reverse translation is to derive a better understanding on how biological mechanisms may lead to clinical outcomes, which is exactly what QSP can do. So we think that the use of QSP in reverse translation is likely to increase in the future. Portfolio prioritization is often a strategic decision based on a variety of information coming from multiple sources, and so for that reason, the influence of QSP there, as with any other single source of information used in this category, may not be well recognized. There is also a significant communication gap here with decision makers, which may think that there is a lack of maturation of QSP at this level. Nonetheless, again, we think that QSP is one of the best approach to provide highly valuable information for decision making and for portfolio prioritization. So we hope that the use of QSP in these domains is going to increase in the future. So, but the optimistic way to look at these bottom areas is that there is still, especially for these 4 categories, there is still a lot of room to grow for QSP. And we also observe significant disparity in response between QSP modelers and non-QSP people, sometimes in some areas of application. For example, it is quite noticeable here for the biomarker identification category. As you can see, it is not entirely clear why there is such difference in perception in the use of QSP for biomarker. One possible explanation is that even though there is some good work of QSP done in biomarker for biomarker identification, it might only account for a very small fraction of all the work done in biomarker development. So next we are going to look at the survey results related to the impact of QSP in immuno-oncology. So one of the questions related to impact was, what have been the contributions of QSP in your IO projects? The survey respondents were provided with levels of impact in the survey questions, as you can see here, and here it is being sorted by the number of responses. And you see that the top impacts are actually quite positive to QSP. According to the respondents, QSP led to critical decision making that led to regulatory use, or at least were helpful with or without regulatory use. And the impacts with the least number of votes are shown here, and they are actually the ones unfavorable to QSP, which in a sense is also a good news for QSP. Another good news is that it seems to happen only very rarely that a decision is taken being opposite to QSP findings. Another good point here is that rarely respondents did not know if QSP was performed or not. And finally, we notice some room for improvement where the categories impact unknown, the QSP work has been ignored, or no QSP work was performed, could ideally be much lower. And again, we notice differences in perception between QSP and non-QSP people. Indeed, the top impacts are also the ones leading to the most differences in perception between QSP modelers and non-QSP people, looking here. Another example here is that the top impact for non-QSP modelers is that the QSP work was ignored in their IO programs, which is not what QSP modelers have observed for themselves. So next we are going to talk about the survey questions related to the challenges of applying QSP in immuno-oncology. One of the questions related to challenges was, what are the challenges in applying QSP modeling to support IO projects? So something we noticed right away with this question is that there seems to be very little disagreement between the type of modelers regarding the challenges of applying QSP in IO. So the top challenges identified by the survey respondents were not enough data, the timeline is too long, and lacking validation. The lack of data is actually a challenge for all modeling disciplines, so it's not a surprise that it's also the case for QSP. This can be interpreted in many ways. For example, the data doesn't exist, or maybe it exists, but it's hard to find, or its existence is unknown to the modeler, or maybe its existence is known, but it cannot be accessed for multiple reasons. And the long timelines in QSP development mostly come from the complexity of the approach and the complexity of biology itself that needs to be described. long timelines is actually related to most of the other challenges. For example, insufficient resources. And QSP model validation is a whole topic in itself, still subject to intense debates. There is no recognized process for the validation of QSP models, so it makes sense that it is perceived as one of the top challenges for QSP modeling. It is also related to the other challenges, such as the lack of data and the complexity of the models. And just as we were saying, many of the challenges are actually interlinked. Another example, challenges with data availability can lead to long timelines, inadequate model validation, or lack of engagement. And the challenges with the least number of votes were that QSP is not needed, the budget is too high, the approach is too complicated. So the good news for QSP is that QSP would not be needed, would be the least of an issue. Overall, also it is encouraging to see that the reported challenges seems to lie less with the lack of resources or budget, which is consistent with the notion that QSP modeling is seen as valuable if there is enough data and enough time to support its development. Same impression with the common critique that QSP may be too complicated. This was not seen as a big issue among the respondents. Maybe because QSP may be complicated sometimes, but it is needed to make sense of the complexity. So I mentioned a few times that we observe striking differences in perception on the use and impact of QSP modeling in immuno-oncology between QSP modelers and non-QSP people. So these differences in perception are actually a challenge of QSP related to adequate or lack of communication between teams, which may lead to low engagement. This impression is even more striking in these two graphs. The first graph is showing the level of contribution of QSP in IO programs as perceived by the survey respondents, so from low contribution to high contribution. And the second graph is showing how much people are ready to rely on using QSP in their IO programs in the future. So from they will not rely on QSP at all to they will rely on using QSP a lot. So in both graphs, the purple curve for non-QSP modelers and the yellow curve for non-modelers basically overlap, as you can see here and here, and is almost opposite to the QSP modeler curve. However, the good point, if looking at this graph here on the right, is that for all respondents, whether QSP people or non-QSP people, they expect to mostly rely on QSP for their IO programs in the future. So talking about the future, let's look at the survey questions related to the future directions of QSP in immuno-oncology. So we also asked the respondents to identify key areas of application of QSP in immuno-oncology in the future. The stratification of response actually is not that different from current use, as you can see here on the graph on the left, except that all area of applications are higher, which means that respondents think that QSP will be globally used more in the future than it is currently. So that's quite positive for QSP. This impression is even more visible on the graph on the right, where we calculate the difference in response between future use versus current use. And you see that all respondents think that all application of QSP should see an increase in the future. Another noteworthy observation is that the applications that should see the biggest increase in the futures are also the ones that are currently the least used, which are target validation, portfolio prioritization, and reverse translation. We also observe differences in perception between QSP modelers and non-QSP people. So for example, QSP modelers think that there will be an increase of use of QSP for clinical trial design in the future, and as well for patient stratification. However, non-QSP people think the opposite. And same thing for biomarker, using QSP for biomarker identification, except that it's the opposite. QSP people think that it's going to be used less in the future than it is currently, but non-QSP people think the opposite. There were a couple of questions in the survey allowing free text answers, and one of these questions was, what do you think are the unique aspects of applying QSP in immuno-oncology compared to the other disease areas? And so we are going to review some of the answers that we got. And so here we see a word cloud made of the answers to that question. And you can see that there were a lot of comments on complexity, biological complexity of the tumor, of the immune system. For example, one of the respondents wrote, IO is interesting and challenging because it is the interaction of two complex systems, the immune system and a tumor. And there was also a lot of comments on heterogeneity and interpatient variability. For example, one respondent mentioned very high interpatient variability due to the complexity of the system, and someone else wrote, cancer is heterogeneous in many ways, multiple cancers, multiple strategies in IO, multiple ranges, both dynamic and across patients, heterogeneity within patient, metastasis, and dynamic mutations to be considered. If you recall one of the previous slides on application areas of QSP in IO, combination therapy was the second top application of QSP that were voted by the respondents. The respondents also identified combination therapy as one of the key differences in applying QSP in IO compared to other disease areas, as it was mentioned multiple times in the answer to that question here. And there were also a few comments on differences between different species. For example, someone made the remark that preclinical animal models are changing, and there is an opportunity for QSP to support the preclinical to clinical translation. There were many other aspects mentioned in the answers to that questions. For example, someone mentioned that there is genuine patients data available. Someone else mentioned wide biological knowledge available, and someone else here mentioned that there is direct clinical data available, and many other comments. So this is our final slide. We wanted to conclude with a few takeaways from the survey results. So overall, the survey respondents perceive the contribution of QSP positively, with most of the responses ranging from QSP leading to critical impact on projects to being useful to projects. Another takeaway of the survey results is that QSP models seems to be currently most often used to help with dosing and scheduling of clinical studies, while use in early drug discovery such as target validation and candidate selection is lower at the moment, but is expected to grow in the future. The top 3 challenges for IO QSP model development identified in the survey are limited data, long timeline, and insufficient validation of the models. The survey revealed differences in perception on the impact of QSP in IO between QSP modelers and others, suggesting QSP modelers need to improve education and communication to their stakeholders. For the future, people in general consider that QSP models can further increase their contribution to IO program in all areas, while helping with combination therapy is being selected by the highest number of respondents. And finally, the survey results suggest that there is a lot of room to grow either in terms of communication or applying QSP more widely, or for more transparent validation criteria. So that's it. Thank you for listening, and we will be happy to take any question that you may have.
Thank you, Vincent and Faye. That's very interesting. For all of our attendees, you can enter your questions for the speakers into the questions panel on the GoToWebinar side panel. We do have a few questions to start with. And the first is, you split the results by QSP versus non-QSP. Did you consider looking at the results in terms of leadership versus modelers? And they didn't direct this to a single person, but Faye or Vincent?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer this. So yeah, we thought about, so there's many different split that we could have done. But we were limited by the number of responses. Like, I think we got about 134 responses, and then the split, like you mentioned, about leadership and modeler would have been very unbalanced, because I mean, most of the people, I think, were modelers, either QSP and non-modelers, and we got some people, you know, like more in leadership roles, but maybe it would have been, I don't remember exactly, but maybe 15. I don't remember, but like a small number. So that would be kind of unbalanced, and I don't know if like statistically would have make sense. So that's yeah, that's so in the end we decided to just look at results for a limited number, split ones that were the most balanced, and one of, for example, the one with modular types was, you know, relatively balanced. There was also by the size of the company that we haven't mentioned here at all in the presentation, but because it was not so it was like small company, medium-sized company, and large company. This one was almost, you know, one third, almost like. So that's one of the split we did. But yeah, there is yeah, for example, we could have done also responses from people from academia versus industry, but then again, it's totally unbalanced, like, because most of the people really that responded the survey, because it was sent to ISoP, most of the people were coming from industry, or either, you know, pharma or consulting companies, and there was again some people from academia, but it was like a small number. So again, statistically we could have done that, but it's hard to really rely a lot on this, you know, the finding that we would have get.
And maybe just, I think I totally agree with what Vincent said. Just add a little bit on that. One more point is, I think it's also like, you know, defining leadership roles, because I think, you know, when people saying they're, I think even modelers or non-modelers, right? You know, I don't know, they can be a leadership role as a statistician or clinical pharmacology. So I don't think that's, you know, fully captured in the in our survey. So that's why, in addition to, you know, like we probably don't have enough number to separate that way. Just that's another consideration.
So that goes with one of the other questions of what are the roles of the non-modelers who responded to the survey? If you remember that.
So there, maybe I can start, and Vincent, you can add on. So there are statisticians, the DNPK functions, and then there are portfolio management. I think those are the categories, right? And then we did ask people whether you have experience in developing model or not. So if people who said they have never worked on developing models, then we consider them as non-modeler.
Yeah, so that's pretty much what, you know, Faye said, but also it was allowed in the response people could, if they have made multiple roles, they could click multiple roles, or either currently or in the past, because if they, let's say maybe in the past they were doing modeling, but now they are not doing modeling, so they still have this experience in modeling, so that it was fine for them to say that to click that they did some modeling, and also now they're doing a different role. Yeah, so it was not like distinct role categories.
So what was the most unexpected finding from the survey?
I mean, maybe I can start, like, for me, it was quite striking, like this difference in perception that I mentioned quite a lot in the, maybe it's not the most important, but to me, it was the most striking, because even though we don't have, like I said, so many respondents in terms of statistics, and also, like Faye explained, like there was no question about, do you consider yourself a QSP modeler or a modeler, but non-QSP modeler? It was on purpose. We don't want people to see themselves like sort of biased, the responses. So we didn't ask this question really, but we were able to retrieve this information from many other questions that actually we didn't present today. And so we were able to do this split. But again, yeah, it's split based on interaction, overlapping different question and information. So that's why I was surprised that this difference in perception was quite clear, like from even a limited number of data. So and not only between QSP modelers and non-QSP modelers, but also with non-modelers. And the other surprise for me is that the non-QSP people, whether they are modelers or non-modelers, they seems to have the same opinion about QSP, which is different from what QSP people have. So that was pretty clear and clean in our results. And for me, that was really surprising. I would have not thought that. So that led to a lot of thinking. Why is it like that? How can we explain that? What does it mean for us, and so on? Yeah, so that was one of the most surprising, at least for me.
What about for you, Faye?
Yeah, definitely. I think, probably everyone can, look at these results and, have their own perspective. So one thing I find surprising, it's good surprise is, like looking when we ask people how they're using the QSP in their program. So I'm actually surprisingly nicely to see 40% people saying they've been using the modeling results in the regulatory interactions. So because I feel like there's not a huge amount of information in the public domain. I know it's being used, but to me, it's really nice to see they're actually being used. It seems much higher frequency than what I have expected. I know it's being used a lot in the internal decision making, but it's also good to see it's being used in the regulatory interaction.
And maybe also something else more positive, because I mentioned maybe like this different perception, not necessarily positive aspect, but one of the surprising result was like the majority of people see QSP as positive and something that they want also see more in the future. Everybody, like including like QSP or non-QSP people. So that was maybe surprising, at least a good feeling, and because sometimes we always focus on the bad thing that we think is happening, but in fact that's not what is happening, and so that was also visible from the survey results. And like also like for example the top impact. So in the question we have positive impact and less positive impact, but the one that come in top by far is like the positive impact from the majority of people. And yeah, so that was that was a pretty good feeling. And also where QSP is going in the future, also people, most people want that to have more QSP done work. So that seems to indicate that it is being useful. And yeah.
So one impact of QSP modeling can be a better biological understanding, but this can be difficult to quantify. Do you agree? And if so, what do you think could be done to better capture or highlight this benefit?
I agree. So it does, in my own experience, it does often lead to better biological understanding because, sometimes I'll say when the model is not fitting the data, we do tend to go back to see, what might be, is our understanding of the biology correct, right? Because the model does capture the fairly complex biology. And sometimes, certain interactions or how things work is not, totally clear. There may be multiple ways you can model it, and then we can test different hypotheses to see which one capture the data the best. How to capture that, I think, is a tricky question, right? Because I think, here, the way I'm thinking is the understanding of the biology need to also lead to a concrete impact on drug development. So we're trying to capture that on, say, what's the impact on the drug development, some kind of actionable results. So that's at least a way. So I think directly, it's probably like behind the scene, it's really how that's influencing a lot of decisions. But capturing that as a direct measurement, I think it can be tricky.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what Faye just said. But actually, this question cannot really be answered from the survey result because the impact, there were like broad category in terms of how useful, impactful in general QSP was to the project. So it was not about like specific aspect, like how did it help in understanding better, biological pathway and so on. So we cannot really answer, but I agree with what Faye said about how it can be done and the importance of that.
Do you think that your survey, together with some of the published results, could perhaps better define the value of QSP to the community? I'm not sure that I truly understand what they mean by value, but I would assume a dollar value or a something like that.
I think so, because like one of the surprising, I mean, of course it has to be taken with a grain of salt, maybe because of the number of respondents not so high, but still significant. And so, like I was saying, one of the surprises that like most of the respondents, either modeler or stakeholders, non-modelers, they think in their own responses. They were not forced to say that, but they think that QSP is being useful, and they think positively about it, most of them, and they want it to be done more in the future. So I think that's coming from the survey result. This could be used, let's say, to make the point that QSP is important, and maybe we should invest more in QSP. Yeah, I think that plus, like in the question said, like all the publication also that about QSP in the results, and also now more and more regulatory, it's showing more and more, it's including more and more into regulatory submissions. Also, like I agree with Faye. Also, it was a surprise for me, like that the top impact was it was critical to the program, to the project, and led to regulatory use. And I was surprised. For example, I responded to the survey myself, right? And I don't think I said, I might have not clicked that box because, yeah, that's, But so I was surprised. Yeah. So that's the fact that there's more and more regulatory submissions. It's really increasing almost exponentially, I think, because with the ISoP groups, we are in contact with people from like FDA and so on, and we can that's why they tell us. So yeah, there is like concrete elements that indicate that QSP is useful and seems to be more and more useful on a positive inclining curve. So yeah.
The other thing how maybe adding value is that because a lot of this work cannot be published, right? Or it's not published yet. So hopefully using this survey give people a sense, right? What's going on, so maybe that's another way of, bringing in value.
And that actually leads to another question that was sent in, that much of the work for QSP is either just not discussed or not published. And do you think the areas that had less use or less impact maybe are due to the fact that it's just not visible to the community?
Yes. Yes, I totally agree with this, and I think that's one of the also that's also what we see, like when we look at all the different categories of impact that we have in the survey, we also try to find publication from the literature in those areas, for example, biomarker development, combination therapy, dosing and scheduling, and so on, all the categories that we showed. And we found that there was a very clear correlation between the number of publications in each area and the response that we get. So it seems that, yeah, there's a correlation between if a topic is well published or not, then do people think that it is currently being used or impactful, that there's a correlation there. And so, yeah, because, for example, related to that is that, for example, I mentioned for biomarker, the biomarker application with the identification of development, and any other of these domain of application, I think we could find some very nice QSP paper there, very nice work. But if you look at the overall field, let's say biomarker development, this work is really a tiny piece of all the work being done. So if you are not the person that has done this work and you think, oh, this work is great, and even other people will say, oh, this work is great, but most of the work, most of the people that work in this field, they will not consider so much that because it's like a tiny piece of the work that is being done. So yeah, I think it's the relative proportion of things in terms of quantity, not in terms of quality. So it's for now, it's just, yeah, it's mostly because still in terms of quantity, it's still a small proportion of all the work being done, I think, for all of those categories.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, publication is important. Definitely, one thing after seeing the correlation Vincent mentioned between the number of publications versus the impact people have selected, I definitely, confirmed, I guess, our thinking, publishing the work, letting people know this work has been done and having the impact is going to have a broader impact beyond a single project. I think it's going to have a really broad impact on the overall field.
So the QSP application of biomarkers is seen as growing by non-modelers, but not by modelers, which is sort of the opposite of many other things. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I'm trying to find again the slide. Yeah, so in fact, I realized I misspoke in the recording because I said that the QSP modelers seems to think that biomarker application will diminish in the future, which is not the case. What is the case is that it's gonna grow, but it's gonna grow in the future. That's what QSP people think, but it's going to grow less than what non-modeler, non-QSP modeler, non-modeler think. So yeah, so I'm just want to correct this. So then there's this gap here. So now why we think that? I mean, one of possible explanation is that, okay, there is limited resources in QSP, and there is all these different, basically QSP can be applied to all of these domain of application across all the drug development, phases. so there's all this work that can be done, and at some point you have to choose, okay, which one are you going to focus on? And it seems now that maybe QSP people, they would like to focus on other things. I mean, there's been work done in biomarker identification development, and maybe they think, you know, in the future, I would like to be doing more work in reverse translation. So that means that if you do this work in reverse translation, you will not have your less opportunity, less time because of limitation in time and resource to work on, keep working on this biomarker development that you have done in the past. I don't know. I feel like for me that's one possible explanation why. Yeah, I don't know, Faye, if you have thoughts.
I wonder whether also like looking at the current impact and the future impact, right? Looking at that difference, I think non-QSP modelers and maybe non-modelers feel like biomarker is a really important field where, you know, QSP model can be influencing. So maybe there's not a lot impact right now, but really thinking that's where they see QSP model should go. At least, you know, it's one of the place where QSP can have an impact. I think the other one is really combination, especially for IO. So, you know, that's really, you know, I think go from like number 2 to the number 1 when we ask people about the future direction. I think combination therapy or study design, that's, you know, everyone seems to think that's a critical place, and really hoping QSP can help there.
Yeah, and maybe one last thing is that, yeah, Faye, you're right that if I look again at the data about use in the future, biomarker is one of the top 3, and there's very little difference in perception between QSP model types. Everybody thinks that that should go up, but so again, how to explain the difference in between QSP modelers for compared to current use? I think maybe one possibility is that QSP people are more aware of the work done in biomarker than non-QSP people, so they know it's being done. The non-QSP people, they are maybe not fully aware of what's being done currently, and they think, and so that's why the low response for current use. But then when they ask what use should you for the future, they think, oh, biomarker, it should be applicable to biomarker, and so that's why there's this high for the future, and this big difference between current use where maybe they are not fully aware of what's being done, and that could be also an explanation.
So I think we have time for just one more question, and I'd like to slide one of my questions in. I noticed there's gaps between QSP and non-QSP, and I wondered about the role of communication and how communication might impact a future survey like this. So how do you, Faye and Vincent, think that we might improve the communication between the different roles and use that to expand the use of QSP or improve the use of QSP in the community?
Yeah, I agree. I think communication is so important. So in the paper, we also had a lot of discussion about communication. It actually, we feel that's touch upon a lot of challenges. Like people highlighted in the survey, for example, even like, data, when we talk about maybe data not available, it's not only they're not exist, sometimes it's just somewhere else, right? You really have the communication with other departments within the company to find the data or have them willing to share the data. And then communication, also related to the timeline. So you really need to manage the expectation, make sure we can communicate, right? It does take longer to build a QSP model, why it take longer, why it's justified to take longer. So, and then at the end, really how we communicate the results, right, back to the stakeholders, because it is very complex, right? What are the high-level conclusions? So people understand assumptions, but also people can understand how they can use this model results. So communication is so important. It really touch upon, many, many different aspects that we have observed in the survey results.
Yeah, and I think it's not just more communication, it's also, I think, more interactions between all these different specialties, teams, even like, for example, biomarker, people, biomarker scientists or biologists. So more interactions, not just, you know, more, yeah, of course, more education, more communication, but also more interaction that would help with a lot of the challenges. I think, for example, even I was thinking lack of data. Lack of data is not just because data doesn't exist. It's because data often they exist, but it's not known that they exist. So if you don't interact with people that actually generate this data, you will not necessarily know that there's data here for you that you can use. And also, even if you know, but you don't interact with these people, they may not want to share this data because they don't know what are you going to do with this data. You know, you always feel kind of protect your data. So yeah, so then yeah, it's not just communication, but more interaction. Like communication for me is like one way, but like two ways communication interactions on a day-to-day basis. That I think that would ease with all of the challenges I think that we have like in the like mentioned in the survey.
Thank you. We are out of time. We do have a couple of questions left. We will send that to, we'll send those questions to Faye and Vincent for those who did not have a chance to get their questions addressed. But I would like to thank both of you for a very interesting webinar and a great chance to promote what your working group does and the impact actually that your working group can have on the community and the impact of QSP on the community. So thank you, Vincent, and thank you, Faye, for a really wonderful webinar.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity to present and discuss. Yeah, very interesting work. It would be nice to do it again in 10 years to see where we are.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day, and I hope to see everybody at a future webinar.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.